Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a really interesting idea from the business world today. It's called the strategy paradox, and we're going to be looking at it based on Michael E. Raynor's book. It really challenges how we think about success and, well, even failure when it comes to strategy.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you first encounter it. The things that make companies super successful can actually be the very things that lead to their downfall. It's like you need to commit to a plan, but you also got to be ready to change everything if things go sideways.
Yeah,
How do you balance that, right?
a paradox, huh? So it's like the road to success is also paved with, well, the potential for failure. That's kind of crazy.
Exactly. And one of the biggest drivers of this whole paradox is uncertainty. We love to look at companies that are killing it and think they had this crystal ball, this perfect vision of the future.
Hmm.
But, what if the future doesn't play out the way anyone expects?
Like Blockbuster, for example. They were the kings of video rentals, but they totally missed the boat on streaming. They went all in on physical stores, and it wiped them out.
Blockbuster is like the poster child for how a winning strategy can turn into a huge liability when the market throws you a curveball. They were so obsessed with optimizing their business as it was, they just couldn't see how those new technologies would disrupt everything.
A cautionary tale for sure. So how do you avoid falling into that trap? How do you stay committed, but also stay adaptable?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's not about just picking one or the other. You need both commitment and flexibility. It's about recognizing how they're kind of at odds with each other, this inherent tension, and figuring out how to manage that tension effectively.
So it's less about finding the one right strategy and more about managing the risks.
Right, exactly. Any strategy is a bet on what the future will look like. And like any bet, there's risk involved. The bigger the bet, the bigger the potential payout. But also, the bigger the potential for things to go very wrong.
Yeah, I'm starting to get why this is called a paradox. It's like you can't have success without risk, but risk can also lead to failure. It's a bit of a mind bender.
You got it. And that's why those traditional ways of doing strategic planning, they often fall short. They assume a level of predictability that just doesn't exist in the real world.
You're talking about those classic frameworks like SWOT analysis, right? You know, analyzing strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. They all rely on this idea that we can kind of predict the future, right?
Exactly. They operate under this assumption that the future is, somewhat predictable. But with technology changing so fast, customer tastes shifting all the time, and, well, global events that nobody can predict, that assumption just doesn't hold water anymore.
It's like trying to navigate through a maze, but the walls keep moving. You might have a map, but it won't do you much good if the path keeps changing.
That's a perfect analogy, and it really highlights why we need a more dynamic, more adaptable approach to strategy. We can't hang on to these fixed plans. We have to accept that strategy is an ongoing process. You experiment, you learn, you adjust. That's the name of the game.
So ditch the traditional planning models altogether. Is that what you're suggesting?
Not necessarily. I mean, they can still be useful. They can help you figure out where you stand right now, where there might be opportunities or potential threats. But don't treat them like they're the absolute truth. You need to add in some approaches that embrace uncertainty, that encourage adaptability.
Okay, so how do companies build that adaptability into their DNA? Is it about having a more flexible organizational structure? Or maybe a culture that encourages people to experiment? What's the secret sauce?
It's a combination of things, really. You need the right leadership, the right processes, and the right mindset. It's all about creating an environment where people feel like they can challenge assumptions, take calculated risks, and it's okay to, make mistakes and learn from them.
That sounds great in theory, but how does it work in practice? Are there like specific techniques or frameworks that companies can use to really embrace this more adaptive approach to strategy, something they can actually implement?
Absolutely, and that's exactly what we'll delve into next. We're going to explore some really powerful concepts like real options thinking and scenario planning, which can help companies navigate this whole strategy paradox thing. Build organizations that can thrive even when the world is constantly changing.
Sounds like we're going even deeper down the rabbit hole. I
Oh.
can't wait.
Okay, so let's unpack this real options thinking. It's a powerful idea, actually comes from finance, but it can totally change how we think about strategy. The basic idea is to make strategic investments that give you flexibility if things change.
Okay, that sounds kind of interesting, but I'm not sure I'm getting it. Can you give me an example of how this would actually work in a business, like a real world example?
Sure, sure. So instead of making one big, irreversible bet on a particular strategy, think of it as a series of smaller, more flexible bets. These smaller bets give you the option to invest more if things are looking good, but you're not obligated.
So it's like buying a call option on a stock, right? You pay a little bit for the right to buy the stock at a set price later. If the stock goes up, you exercise your option, buy it. If it tanks, you just let the option expire and you only lose that small amount you paid up front.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And that's the beauty of real options thinking. You limit the downside risk, but keep the upside potential. In the business world, these options can look like a lot of different things.
So what would these real options look like in an actual company strategy?
Well, they could be pilot projects, testing the waters,
Yeah.
or strategic partnerships, small-scale market tests, maybe investments in new technologies that are still developing. The key is that they give you information and flexibility.
So instead of going all in on a big product launch, you might test it in a smaller market first, see how customers react. If it's a hit, you scale it up. If it's a flop, you cut your losses and move on.
Exactly. Look at Google. They're always experimenting with new products and features, but they rarely jump in with both feet right away. Beta versions, feedback, iterate, iterate, iterate. They only really commit serious resources when they see strong signals that the market wants it.
They're basically buying options on the future, right?
Right.
It lets them stay agile and respond quickly to those changing customer preferences. Way less risky than betting the farm on a single idea that may or may not pan out.
Absolutely. Real options thinking is about working with uncertainty, not pretending it doesn't exist. It's about acknowledging you don't have all the answers up front and building a strategy that lets you learn and adapt as you go.
I can see how this would be super valuable in industries where things are changing really fast, like tech or healthcare. But can you apply this to more traditional industries? I mean, does
Yeah.
it work everywhere?
Oh, definitely. Any industry where there's a lot of uncertainty can benefit from this. Let's say you have a manufacturing company thinking about a new production facility. Instead of building a mega factory right away, they could start with a smaller pilot plant, test new technologies or processes.
So they're essentially buying an option on whether that technology is going to be the next big thing. If it works, they scale up. If not, they can pivot to something else without sinking a ton of money into an investment that might not pay off.
You got it. It's about mindset, how you approach decision making. You accept that the future is uncertain and you build in that flexibility from the start.
This is really making me rethink how I think about strategic planning. It's not about trying to come up with this perfect plan. It's more about creating options and being ready to change direction when you need to.
Exactly. Now, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about another powerful tool for dealing with uncertainty. It's called scenario planning.
Okay, hit me with it. What's scenario planning all about?
Well, scenario planning is basically imagining different possible futures and coming up with strategies for each one. It forces you to think outside the box, to challenge those assumptions you might be holding onto without even realizing it.
So instead of assuming the future is going to unfold in this predictable straight line, you're saying there are multiple paths it could take, each with its own set of challenges and opportunities, right?
Right. It's about embracing the complexity of the future, and coming up with strategies that are strong enough to survive different outcomes, even the unexpected ones.
So how does this actually work in a company? Do they just like sit around and brainstorm all kinds of crazy scenarios?
It's a bit more structured than that. The first step is identifying the key uncertainties that could really shake things up for your business. These could be anything from technological disruptions to, changes in how consumers behave to geopolitical events that could throw everything off balance.
So you're basically pinpointing those wild cards, the things that could completely derail your carefully crafted plans, right?
Precisely. Once you've identified those key uncertainties, you start developing different scenarios, but they have to be plausible. Each scenario paints a clear picture of what the world might look like if those uncertainties play out in different ways.
So for a company like Tesla, a key uncertainty might be how quickly electric vehicles are adopted by the mainstream, right? They might develop one scenario where EVs take over in the next 5 years, another where it's slower, and maybe even a worst-case scenario where government regulations or some unforeseen tech issue slows things down.
Perfect example. The goal is to create a diverse set of scenarios that captures that full spectrum of possible futures. Then the next step is to develop strategies for each of those scenarios.
So you're essentially creating a playbook for different possible worlds.
hmm
If scenario A happens, we execute strategy A. If scenario B happens, we shift to strategy B.
That's the general idea. Scenario planning is about thinking ahead, anticipating those disruptions, and having backup plans ready to go. It's all about strategic flexibility.
Sounds like a lot of work. Is it really worth the effort?
Oh, absolutely. Scenario planning can be a game changer. It helps you challenge those assumptions you might not even realize you're making, identify blind spots, and develop strategies that are much stronger. It can save you from being blindsided by those unexpected events.
So instead of just reacting to whatever gets thrown at you, you're being proactive, anticipating the challenges and coming up with solutions before they turn into full-blown crises.
Exactly. Think about a company like Shell Oil. They've been using scenario planning for decades to stay ahead of potential shifts in the energy market. It's helped them make smart decisions about investing in renewable energy, navigate those tricky geopolitical risks, and adapt to those constantly changing consumer demands.
It's like they're playing chess with the future. They're thinking several moves ahead, anticipating how their opponents, or the market forces in this case, might respond. Much more sophisticated than just trying to predict exactly what's going to happen.
You got it. It's about acknowledging that uncertainty and figuring out how to thrive in any of those possible worlds. It's about creating options, not getting stuck on a single rigid plan.
I'm starting to see how real options thinking and scenario planning fit together. They're both about building in that flexibility and adaptability.
You're absolutely right. They're like two sides of the same coin when it comes to managing uncertainty. Real options are about building that portfolio of options that you can adjust as the market shifts, while scenario planning is about anticipating those potential disruptions and having strategies in place to handle them, whatever the future throws at you.
So it's not about picking one or the other, it's about using both of them together to create a strategy that can really weather the storm.
Exactly. They're both essential tools for any strategist who wants to navigate the strategy paradox.
This is all making a lot more sense now. But how does this actually work at different levels of a company? We've been talking about companies as a whole, but how do individual business units or departments handle this tension between being committed to a plan and being flexible enough to adapt?
That's a great question, and it gets at the importance of aligning the different levels of strategy within an organization. Think of it like a pyramid. At the very top, you have the corporate level strategy. That sets the overall direction for the entire company.
In this top-level strategy is where you would apply those big-picture tools, like scenario planning, right? For
Yeah.
trying to anticipate those major disruptions and chart a course for the entire organization.
Exactly. But then, as you move down the pyramid, you have the strategies for each business unit, which are more focused on specific products or markets.
So if the corporate level is all about navigating uncertainty, what's the main focus of the business units?
At the business unit level, it becomes all about execution. They take the overall direction set by the corporate strategy and turn it into concrete actions.
So if the corporate level decides that, say, electric vehicles are the future, a business unit might focus on developing a specific EV model, figuring out the manufacturing process, the marketing campaign, all of that. They're laser focused on winning in their specific market.
Exactly, and that requires a different mindset. While the corporate level is embracing uncertainty and creating options, the business unit needs to commit to a specific path and execute it flawlessly.
It's like the difference between a general and a soldier. The general is thinking about the whole campaign, while the soldier is focused on winning the battle right in front of him.
That's a perfect analogy. And it highlights the potential for tension between those two levels. The business unit might feel pressure to stick to the plan, even when things are changing in the market.
Right, because they've been given a specific goal, and they're measured on their performance. It can be tough to balance that short-term pressure with the need to adapt for the long term.
It is, and that's why leadership needs to create a culture that values both. It's about empowering business units to execute, but also giving them the space to adapt and innovate.
So finding that sweet spot, right? Committed enough to win today, but flexible enough to adapt to those long-term changes in the market.
Precisely. And that balance is always shifting. It's an ongoing process of adjustment and realignment, and it requires a deep understanding of how those different levels of strategy interact and influence each other.
This is fascinating stuff. It's making me rethink how companies should be structured, how leaders should make decisions in a world that's constantly changing.
It is. And it highlights the importance of not just having the right strategies, but also the right organizational structures, processes, and culture to support those strategies.
So it's not just about what you do, but how you do it.
Exactly. And that brings us to another critical point, separating strategy from uncertainty management.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. How do you separate those two?
A lot of companies fall into this trap. Either they overcommit to one strategy or they try to hedge so much that they lose focus and can't compete effectively. The key is recognizing that these are two different challenges that you need to address separately.
So you're saying different parts of the company should handle each one.
Exactly. Business units should be 100% focused on executing their specific strategies and winning in their markets today. They need that unwavering commitment to succeed.
That makes sense. But what about the uncertainty part?
That's where the corporate leadership comes in. Their job is to scan the horizon, anticipate disruptions, and invest in those options that will prepare the company for multiple pathing futures.
So almost like having two separate teams working side by side.
Precisely. Think of it this way. A company might have a business unit that's totally focused on one specific technology or product. All their chips are on that table. But at the corporate level, they might be investing in a bunch of other technologies or exploring totally different market opportunities. They're hedging those bets for the long game.
That's a great way to picture it. Like having a team of explorers constantly searching for new lands, while the rest of the company is focused on building a thriving city on the land they already have.
Perfect analogy. It's about balancing exploration with exploitation. You have to exploit your existing resources and capabilities to win today, but you also have to explore new possibilities if you want to survive in the long run.
It's a delicate balancing act, and it takes a lot of trust and communication between the different levels of the organization.
Absolutely. You need to create a culture where people understand the need for both commitment and flexibility. It's about giving people the power to make decisions, but also holding them accountable for the result.
Yeah, so it's about creating a culture where people feel empowered and aligned, and
Mm.
having systems in place to track progress, measure results, and make adjustments along the way.
You got it. It's not just about changing your mindset. It's about having the right structures and processes to support that more adaptive approach.
This has been a really eye-opening conversation. It's clear that the strategy paradox is a powerful concept that can really change how we think about strategy and leadership in this crazy, ever-changing world.
It's been great sharing these ideas with you. I hope our listeners are finding it valuable too.
So we've talked a lot about the theory behind this strategy paradox, exploring ideas like real options thinking and scenario planning. But how does all of this actually translate into real-world success? Are there companies out there putting these ideas into practice and, well, actually seeing results?
Oh, absolutely. There are plenty of companies that have embraced these principles and built organizations that are both committed and adaptable. They understand that leadership in this world of constant uncertainty requires a different way of thinking.
So it's not just about having a brilliant CEO who can predict the future and make all the right calls. It's more about creating a culture, a set of processes that lets the whole organization adapt and thrive even when things are changing all the time.
You got it. It's about moving away from that traditional top-down approach to strategy, where a small group of execs make all the decisions. It's about embracing a more decentralized, data-driven approach.
Got any examples of companies that are doing this well? Real world examples?
Well, Amazon comes to mind. They've built an incredibly successful and adaptable organization by really weaving a few key principles into their very fabric. First and foremost, they have an unwavering commitment to their core values, especially customer obsession.
Right, you hear that all the time with Amazon. They're laser focused on giving customers an amazing experience, and they'll go above and beyond to make that happen.
It's not just lip service, it's ingrained in their culture and how they make decisions. But at the same time, they're incredibly experimental. They're willing to take risks.
Oh, that seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it? How can you be so committed to your core values and also be constantly experimenting and taking risks? Wouldn't those two things clash?
It's about understanding the difference between core principles, which are timeless, and your specific strategies, which need to evolve over time. Customer obsession, that's Amazon's core principle, and it's non-negotiable. But how they achieve that can change.
So they're always testing new ideas, exploring new markets, even disrupting themselves before someone else does. They're not afraid to cannibalize their own business if it means staying ahead of the game.
Exactly. Think about Amazon Web Services, AWS, their cloud computing platform. It started as an internal project, just something to support their own e-commerce business. But they saw the potential for it to become something much bigger.
And they were willing to invest heavily in it, even though it was completely different from their main e-commerce business. That was a big bet, but it paid off big time. I mean, AWS is one of their most profitable businesses now.
A textbook example of how Amazon balances commitment with adaptability. Committed to those core values, but willing to make bold bets on new ideas and explore uncharted territory.
And they're not afraid to fail either. They've had some flops along the way, but they seem to have a culture that sees failure as a chance to learn.
That's so important for any successful strategy. Create an environment where people feel safe taking risks and learning from their mistakes.
So Amazon's doing a great job. But are there companies that have stumbled with this strategy paradox and, well, paid the price?
Unfortunately, yes. Lots of companies have fallen into that trap of either overcommitting to a single strategy or hedging so much that they lose their edge. Remember Kodak? We talked about them earlier. They invented the digital camera, but they were so stuck on their film business that they missed the boat on that whole digital revolution.
A classic case of a company blinded by its own success. They were so focused on protecting what was making them money that they missed the chance to lead the way in digital photography.
And the consequences were, well, pretty dire. Kodak, once a giant in the industry, went bankrupt. It's a harsh reminder of what can happen when companies can't adapt to changing market conditions.
These examples really drive home the point that navigating this strategy paradox is a high-stakes game. It's not just about tweaking your business plan here and there, it's about a fundamental shift in how you approach strategy and leadership.
You nailed it. It's a deep change in mindset, embracing uncertainty, empowering people to experiment and take risks, and building a culture that values commitment and adaptability, all at the same time.
So, what's your advice for leaders who are trying to wrap their heads around this new way of thinking about strategy? Where do they even start?
First things first, acknowledge that the future is uncertain, period. You can't predict it perfectly, and you can't control every single thing that happens. Once you accept that, you can start to build strategies that are stronger and more adaptable.
So let go of the illusion of control and embrace the messiness of the real world.
Exactly. Move away from that old command and control style of leadership and embrace a more collaborative, iterative approach.
So instead of trying to micromanage every decision, leaders need to give their teams the power to experiment, get feedback, and adjust their strategies based on what they're learning on the ground.
Exactly. Create a culture of continuous learning and improvement. Strategy isn't a static document, it's an ongoing process.
It sounds like you're advocating for a much more decentralized approach to strategy. Instead of all the big thinking happening at the top, you're saying companies should push decision-making down to the front lines.
Right. The people closest to the customer, closest to the market, they often have the best insights into what's working, what's not, and where the real opportunities are.
But doesn't that risk creating chaos, inconsistency? If you give people that much autonomy, how do you make sure everyone's working towards the same goals?
It's about finding that sweet spot. Balance between autonomy and alignment. Give people the freedom to experiment and make decisions, but make sure everyone understands the common goals.
So set clear strategic priorities, communicate them clearly across the organization, and build a culture of trust and accountability where people feel empowered to make decisions, but also know they're responsible for the results.
Exactly. A culture where people feel empowered and aligned. And have systems to track progress, measure results, and make adjustments along the way.
So it's not enough to just change your mindset. You also have to have the right structures and processes to support this more adaptable approach.
Absolutely. It's a big transformation. Leadership, culture, processes, systems, all of it.
This has been an incredible conversation. The strategy paradox is such a powerful concept, and it has huge implications for how we think about strategy and leadership today.
I've really enjoyed sharing these thoughts with you, and I hope our listeners have gotten a lot out of it too.
I'm sure they have.
Yeah.
And to all our listeners out there, I'll leave you with this. We've talked a lot about adapting to change, but what if you could go even further? What if you could be the disruptor? Anticipate those changes that are coming and position yourself to lead the way.
That's a great goal to have. It's about moving from just reacting to change to actually driving innovation, shaping the future instead of just responding to it.
Exactly. It's about understanding what forces are shaping your industry and making bold bets on where things are headed.
It's not easy, but that's what separates the truly great companies from the pack.
Well, that's definitely something to think about. Thanks again for joining us on the Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing the boundaries.